Hello loves and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about colonial traumas, and we're going to be starting a series on different colonial traumas, how they impact you, etc, etc. There's a lot that we need to discuss on it. Today we're going to be talking about the colonial trauma of power, but before I get started, I just wanted to give you guys a couple of updates. First, I'm currently having a special on all of my services. Right now you can use the code "This is Halloween" for 50% off all of my services, which I'm really excited about because I get to basically celebrate my favorite month of the year, especially here in the United States. So yeah, definitely take advantage of it if you need like a tarot reading, past life reading, astrology reading, spiritual counseling, all the things. My website will be linked down below. And the second thing is that our workshop for this month, which is all about empowering your crown, which is going to be focused on hair rituals, specifically how to work your hair spiritually. We're going to have a hair activation meditation. We're going to go through like how to make a hair oil recipe for your hair, for your crown, for different intentions. It's going to be a really cool workshop, so definitely make sure you get your tickets down below. It will be linked down below. As always, Patreon members, high priest and high priest levels already automatically have tickets, because that's just, you know, the perk of being on the a Patreon member on the high priestess level. Now, with that being said, I am working on the podcast is about to launch as well, so keep an eye out for when I make the post about that. And yeah, let us get started on this conversation, because I think it's definitely an important conversation to have when it comes to colonial trauma, healing colonial trauma and colonial history. And when it comes to processing a lot of what, you know, generationally, when it comes to ancestor work, colonial trauma matters. Colonial trauma has a big role on how you actively perceive a lot of different things, especially things that got passed down to you down the line. Colonial trauma is part of ancestor work. It's just that a lot of people have not gotten to that level of ancestor work where they're thinking about it through the perception of decolonizing, or thinking about like, oh shit, how did colonization actually impact me and my ancestors? Now, sometimes people have an awareness of, oh yeah, my ancestors went through some shit, right? But they don't perceive it as, oh, I need to heal this. Oh, how is this impacting me and my perceptions and my beliefs today? Oh, how am I addressing this? Oh, I recognize that this person feels that way because of their colonial trauma. So yeah, that's the conversation we're going to be having today. I'm going to try to, you guys know, I can talk for hours. I can talk for days. So I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet and just explain the first colonial trauma that we're going to be talking about, which is the colonial trauma of power. Okay, there's different types of colonial trauma that we will be covering. This is going to be a series, so we're going to break them down different, you know, different videos. This one is on power. We're going to be talking about religious indoctrination. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things because there's a lot of different ones. Okay, but today we're going to talk about power. Why? Because the colonial trauma of power is the foundation, and also kind of ends up being also connected to some of the other traumas, the other colonial traumas themselves. Power is always at the base and the foundation. Colonization happened because of a perception of power, but also a focus on controlling those who are BIPOC, okay, and those who are indigenous minorities, those who are part of different ethnic groups. It's specifically focused on looking at one of the colonizers, and the colonizers being the ones that have that perception of power where they're the ones that are dominating what's happening. Okay, so colonial trauma, when it comes to power specifically, it's about how power is enforced. So if you look at colonization and you have to look at your specific histories, because it's different by country, by nations, by sovereign nations, by different, you know, history. Everybody doesn't have the same history. A lot of people love to homogenize things as just like, no, everything is exactly the same. It is not. We have different colonial traumas, different influences, we have different histories, and we need to start respecting the fact that we have different histories and instead of like arguing so much about it. when you acknowledge, okay, you have a different history, then you start diving into your history to look at your colonial trauma. It gives you a bigger perception of how to navigate, okay? How to navigate specifically what you need to focus on ancestrally. And this is the key. If you're looking at things from somebody else's historical lens, your lens is going to be a little bit diluted, and you're not going to be able to understand certain things that need healing in a way that your ancestors experienced. So it's important for you to actively look at your own history when you're addressing colonial traumas. I cannot stress that enough. Now, when it comes to the different ways that the colonial trauma of power was applied, you can see this with domination, and when it came to telling, you know, BIPOC what they needed to eat, influencing different aspects of their culture, changing different aspects of their culture, telling them what they needed to believe in, what they couldn't, what they could wear, what they couldn't wear, actually applying force and forcing it. When you start looking at like slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, when you start looking at enforcing power, enforcing and dominating people to do things, and they having the colonial just party having the power over, right, said people, it's very complex in the way the trauma of power ends up taking up space, because it starts with colonization, then it starts with, okay, telling BIPOC what to do, whether it started with our, you know, my Taino ancestors. So especially on this side of the world, it started with our Taino ancestors when it comes to colonial traumas in the Turtle Island, was now known as the Americas. Started with my Taino ancestors. So it started with the indigenous people of the land first. That's how it started, right? And so at first it was like, it was the power in weapons and weaponry, right? So they kind of looking at indigenous and our Taino history when it comes to our weaponry and what we had. The colonizers had a more modern weaponry, which ended up, it worked for their benefit when it came to applying their power. And, you know, when it came to the battles that were had, because my Taino ancestors went to war with the colonizers, a lot of people like to just see it as, you know, oh, we were just really nice, because there's a lot of things that were written, you know, about our people. And yes, my Taino ancestors were nice and you know, gave the colonizers hospitality, because you're meeting someone new, you're not going to just start, you know, going in on them, right? But once, you know, things were evidently like, oh no, we're trying to completely exploit your lands. We went to war, like my Taino ancestors went to war with the colonizers. But the way power was implied was through so many different ways. Now, because, for example, and this is why it's important to look at your specific history for this, because not everybody has the same history. So I'm going to give you the example of how it connects to me. You guys know I'm Dominican. So when it comes to Dominican history, at its inception, it starts off with my Taino ancestors, because they originate the islands. So they're native to the islands. And so it starts with them first. So their experience with the trauma of power is a little bit different than my African ancestors, because my African ancestors done got dragged all the way, got stolen and dragged all the way from a whole nother continent. So I have colonial trauma from the people of the islands, the people who originate the islands, dealing with the colonizers trying to exploit their land for gold, trying to take their lands, basically turn it, again, it was a big trade thing. So growing different crops, trying to force them to grow different things to trade and basically use them for money. But also at the same time, Spain wanted control of the islands. After like years and years and years of kind of like them dealing with our Taino ancestors and different rebellions and different things happening, it got to a point in like, it was like in 1560s where they declared my Taino ancestors extinct. What basically happened was that Spain sent a letter to the soldiers in the island saying, hey, can y'all do a head count of how many Tainos are left? And because the Spanish soldiers were lazy, they just wrote, there's none left, they're extinct. Because they didn't want to go around and count, because there was a lot of Tainos that were hiding in the mountains that knew the lands better than they did, because that's their lands, and hid in caves and hid up in the mountains where they weren't going to find them. And they didn't want to comb through all of the islands and say, oh yeah, we're finding some. No, they just said, no, there's none left. So that emboldened Spain to be like, oh, well, they're extinct, is our land now. And because by then they were already mixing, because when it comes to Dominican history, our mixture, when it comes to our ancestral mixture, starts off pretty much when the colonizers get here, when Columbus got here. Because our African ancestors started coming in 1503. And then when it comes to our Tainos, they pretty much started mixing with them when they came. So because my Taino ancestors were dealing with that aspect of relating to power, colonial power, and because my African ancestors were dealing with a different way in which the colonial power was being applied to them, because to them, they're getting dragged from their homelands and coming to a whole different lands that they do not know, into a space that they do not know, with meeting people that they do not know or feel comfortable with, right? It's a culture shock, it's a land shock, it's complete power control, right? But both of those group of people, Tainos and our African ancestors, went to two different things. Because on one side, you have the colonizers claiming the island and persecuting Tainos and those who claim indigeneity, because Spain wanted to have full control of the island and they saw Tainos as a threat, which is why a lot of the Tainos, if you go to any of the islands, all of them will tell you the exact same thing. They went, oh, ellos se fueron a la montaña. That's what you hear from all of our grandparents, all of our elders. No, ellos se fueron, ellos se escondieron para la montaña. And what that means in English is that they went and they hid in the mountains. Because the thing about my Taino ancestors is that they knew the way of the lands. They knew where everything was. They would navigate caves, like underground systems, a lot of the time, because they knew the lands. And so they were able to, kind of hide themselves. And that's part of the colonial trauma with power when it comes to Taino identity today. The descendants of Tainos are still navigating, identifying as Taino, because even our own grandparents were scared, or it felt like they would get reprimanded or have soldiers or the government come after them if they identified with their indigeneity. So even though we all celebrate a mixed culture, there's certain aspects of said culture that are very much still oppressed through that colonial trauma of power. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to Taino identity, it is very complex, and has a lot of different components as to colonial trauma of power within itself. You had a whole group of people whose strangers came onto their land and basically alienated them in their own land and forced them to assimilate into a whole different culture that was never theirs to begin with. So it's like that, it's a whole different thing. So we have paper genocide, colonial trauma passed down to Taino descendants is something that we still have to deal with when it comes to even having our own indigeneity being accepted by other indigenous people, or even people telling us, oh, why do you claim Taino? Why do you guys claim your Taino heritage? Why do you guys talk about it so much? Like, there's so many people that actively weaponize our Taino ancestry, and will also weaponize and take the colonizers' words of, oh no, Tainos were extinct. Like, you guys are literally reading a colonial manual. You guys are literally listening to Spain. Like, you're siding with Spain. When you say we don't exist, you're siding with them. That's your source for we are extinct. Which is really cringy, honestly, that you know, you rather, like, one of the things when it comes to the paper genocide and having our identity and our indigeneity respected by other indigenous people, is that people will literally side with the colonizer, with Spain, about whether or not we are allowed to exist. It's so weird. But paper genocide is one of our colonial traumas, associated with the trauma of power that we're still dealing with today, especially when it comes to lands, when it comes to recognition within our own communities, all of those things. That's one of them. Now we have a whole nother trauma of power when it comes to our African ancestors and the fact that they done got dragged over to a whole different continent, to a whole different land where they didn't understand, where they didn't feel safe, they didn't know what they were walking into, and they were forced into labor that they didn't ask to be part of in the first place. So there's different types of colonial power and the way power was enforced and applied. Both of those groups went through two different experiences, but one of the reasons why they bonded historically and ancestrally was because they were both indigenous people. That's kind of the thing about Taino ancestors and our African ancestors. In the islands, they bonded because they have indigenous values. They come from indigenous tribes in Africa and just in the islands. So they bonded through that, and they were able to literally work together. And that's why there was, you know, rebellions, the rebellions that there were. But in today's time, the way that all of this gets passed down and the way that it has to be like broken down and it dissected through history, like what am I still like projecting, how do I feel about power? Your relationship to power today and what power looks like and who has the power is very much associated to your colonial trauma. And one of the things that I'm still actively working through is decolonizing the way and the perceptions within my family and how they feel about indigeneity, and how they feel about embracing that, and openly saying what the truth is. Like, we both know what it is, but it is something that, you know, at the end of the day, everybody gets to choose. Like, they get to choose what to identify. Everybody can choose to identify as what they want to. But when it comes to me as the generation that I'm in, it is up to me to make sure that I am actively uplifting that side, because it was so oppressed, like historically from the get-go. The goal was to take the land. And so to me, it's very important to identify with my Taino ancestry, especially because I am in my tribe. I am in my Yukayeke. And so it's important for me to uplift that because it's been so obscenely suppressed before, for different types of reasons. But it comes back to that power. Who has the power? Who has control? Who has a claim? Who has, like, it really comes back down to that power. So it's important for me to continue to uplift that. That's something that I'm personally working and navigating through. Now, obviously, because I am mixed, I handle my colonial trauma and I take it piece by piece. I like to respectively give each side that I am working through and trying to address and trying to dissect in its own separate way. I can't just look at things exactly the same because they're not. They're two different experiences. So it's important for me to make sure that I'm being analytical and that I am trying to see, okay, historically in my island, what happened to this side, what happened to that side, how this side harmed this side, how did it look like in my ancestry, who played a role in what, like that's what I like to break down and break through when it comes to working with my ancestors. So then I can say, okay, calling these specific ancestors to the front of the line. Can we please have a conversation? Can we please focus on healing different issues that came from this? And again, this is the foundation, the colonial trauma of power. And I give you guys this example because that's the way that I wanted to explain it to you guys, as far as to how it relates to me personally in one way. It's not even all of the ways, but it's one way. But we're going to be talking about other different colonial traumas, but the foundation is always power. Power is something, and the perception of power is something that everybody still doesn't realize that they're navigating through. You either feel controlled or you feel like you need to stand up to power. And so that kind of mentality of how you navigate it is very much rooted in your ancestry, and it's important for us to dissect that. And so I wanted to kind of open up this conversation so we can get started on some of the other colonial traumas that we definitely need to talk about, because y'all, it's a lot. Our ancestors went through a lot. Historically, we went through a lot, and it still affects us today. And some people don't know how to put the puzzle pieces together, and this is why I'm starting the series, because the puzzle pieces needs to be put together. There's a reason why these things are happening, okay? With that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. I hope that this kind of opened up your mind a little bit to different ways to approach history and your own healing. And we will be talking more, I promise. I love you guys so much. Thank you guys for subscribing and for being here, and have a blessed night.